Airstrikes have played a significant role in shaping the outcome of the Ukraine war. One of the challenges faced by the Ukrainian army was the lack of a robust aircraft fleet, which put them at a disadvantage against the Russian army. However, this gap was effectively closed when Poland and Slovakia provided the Ukrainian Air Force with MiG-29 fighter jets. Recently, Russian President Vladimir Putin had expressed a lot of confidence in his country's air force. However, this confidence seems to have taken a hit due to Ukraine's recent acquisition of modern air defense systems from Western partners and the addition of MiG-29 fighter jets to the Ukrainian Air Force. Since the MiG-29 were added to the Ukrainian Army's inventory, there has been a 40% increase in their air operations, which can be considered a significant success for the Ukrainian forces. Assuming that the MiG-29 seconds were acquired only a few weeks ago in today's discussion about the ongoing war, we will focus on some of the recent developments and their impact. Firstly, we will examine the latest operations of the Ukrainian Air Force and the general situation on the ground. The Ukrainian Air Force recently carried out 11 attacks on Russian personnel and military equipment clusters, as well as 3 attacks on anti-aircraft missile systems. Initial reports indicate that these attacks resulted in the deaths of 150 Russian soldiers and the injury of 100 others. It has been reported that the injured soldiers were taken to hospitals under Russian control in the Donetsk region. Additionally, a MiG-29 fighter jet from the Ukrainian Air Force was involved in these operations during a patrol flight north of Kiev. A Ukrainian MiG-29 fighter jet engaged in a dogfight with a Russian Su-25 aircraft. After 5 minutes of aerial combat, the Su-25 locked on to the Ukrainian plane. However, the Ukrainian pilot quickly maneuvered behind the Su-25 and fired a shot at its left wing, causing it to crash. This successful operation resulted in the destruction of 1 Russian aircraft throughout the war. The Ukrainian army has destroyed a total of 320 Russian planes and 315 helicopters, which has weakened the Russian Air Force considerably. The Ukrainian army continues to achieve success not only in the air, but also on the ground. Recently, a Ukrainian missile and artillery unit carried out successful strikes on 3 clusters of Russian military personnel, weapons and equipment. They targeted an artillery concentration area, a radar station, 2 electronic warfare stations, an anti-aircraft missile system, and an ammunition depot. As a result of these attacks, initial estimates suggest that nearly 350 Russian soldiers were killed. In the past day alone, the Russian army has carried out 28 airstrikes and 6 missile attacks in response. The Russian army has continued to launch attacks on Ukrainian troop positions and civilian infrastructure in various settlements. However, the majority of these attacks have been successfully repelled by Ukrainian defense troops. Unfortunately, a small number of Russian missiles have caused damage to civilian settlements and resulted in casualties among civilians. As for the rest of the front line, the Russian army continues to suffer significant losses. Yet they do not give up their plans to advance into Ukrainian territory. Offensive operations remain focused in the Lyman, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and Marinka directions. The specified sections of the front line remain the epicenter of military operations, and Ukrainian troops have recently repelled over 60 Russian attacks in these areas. So far, there are no signs of the formation of Russian assault groups. However, the Russian army continues to carry out attacks on civilian settlements. In the past few days, they have bombed 7 settlements in the Sumy region and 5 settlements in the Kharkiv region in the direction of Kupiansk. The Russian army has continued to escalate the conflict by mining the land in for settlements and bombing 3 others in the Kharkiv region in the direction of Lyman. In recent days, they have conducted unsuccessful offensive operations near the settlements of Dybrova and Nizhny Yezhurovka. Additionally, 3 settlements in the Luhansk region, namely Ivanivka, Totsky, and Spirin, have been hit by artillery fire. The Russian army continues to launch attacks in the direction of Bakhmut, and the battle for the city of Batman rages on. Despite facing resistance, the Russian army continues to launch attacks. Recently, they launched an unsuccessful offensive near the settlement of Kromov. Additionally, 12 settlements in the Donetsk region have come under fire from the Russian army in the direction of Avdiivka. The Russian army also attempted to carry out offensive operations in the Avdiivka and Zivin regions of the Donetsk region, but were unable to penetrate the strong defense units of the Ukrainian army known as the Steel Curtain. The Russian army has recently targeted over 15 settlements close to the line of contact, including Karamik, Stepov, Berdyachev, Avdiivka, Pervomaisk, and Karlivka in the Donetsk region in the Marinka region of the Donetsk region. Ukrainian defense troops successfully repelled numerous Russian attacks. However, the town of Hershey in the Donetsk region came under fire from the Russian army in the direction of Shakhtarsk. At the same time, as Kiev reiterated its goal of defeating Russian forces in the devastated city of Donetsk, the Wagner Group mercenaries reportedly took control of a new district in Bakhmut. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that Wagner assault groups successfully liberated lands in the northwest and southeast parts of the embattled eastern enclave. However, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine stated that Bakhmut was the epicenter of the war and that Ukraine successfully repulsed the attacks. Therefore, the accuracy and credibility of these statements remain uncertain. The Russian Defense Ministry's claims may not reflect the complete truth, as Bakhmut has been a site of fierce fighting between Russian and Ukrainian troops for several months, with the Wagner Group mercenaries reportedly playing an important role. US Joint Chiefs of Staff General Mark Milley has previously described Bakhmut as a carnage fest for Russian forces. Russian-backed officials in the Donetsk region have claimed that Ukrainian fighters in Bakhmut are nearly extinct, while Ukraine reported that approximately 4,500 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded in the area in the previous year. On the same day, Russian officials also reported. According to reports, Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary unit, claimed that his forces had eliminated 32,000 Ukrainian fighters in Bakhmut and the nearby settlement of Solder since the conflict began. The Russian Defense Ministry also claimed that their fighters had engaged in heavy fighting in the city, with Wagner's assault troops advancing successfully. However, Ukraine's Eastern Command reported that unprecedented battles were waged in the urban area of Bakhmut, stating that Ukrainian soldiers fought fiercely and courageously in bloody battles. The accuracy of these claims from both sides remains uncertain, as conflicting reports often emerge from the ongoing conflict. The Eastern Command has stated that one of Ukraine's goals is to destroy Russia's combat capability and demoralize their forces. They also underlined that the Ukrainian army has been quite successful in this regard, particularly in early April. Russia's defense ministry claimed that elite airborne troops, or VDV fighters, had joined the Russian forces that were already deployed. According to the ministry, the Russian airborne units were tasked with isolating Ukrainian troops on the flanks and supporting the attack troops to take control of the city. However, the accuracy of these claims is uncertain and the situation remains volatile. The leadership views the frontline embankment as wider than in the nearby Bakhmut. Claims from a Russian Mill blogger suggested that the airborne units were not directly focused on helping Wagner forces besiege and capture Bakhmut, but could be around the city to prevent possible Ukrainian counterattacks. Russia's defense ministry also claimed that Ukrainian troops had withdrawn from Bakhmut and deliberately destroyed the city's infrastructure and residential buildings to slow down the advance of Russian troops. However, the accuracy of these claims remains uncertain, and conflicting reports often emerge from the ongoing conflict. The Ukrainian Defense Ministry has denied the allegations made by the Russian Defense Ministry and Yevgeny Prigozhin, stating that they are not true. They claim that Ukrainian defense troops have successfully repelled every single Russian attack and inflicted significant losses on the Russian troops. Furthermore, Ukraine has previously accused Moscow of using scorched earth tactics, including sabotaging the remaining infrastructure in Bakhmut that could be of use to the Ukrainian forces. As conflicting reports emerge from both sides, many claims cannot be verified by Russia or Ukraine based on published satellite images and reports from independent observers in the region. It appears that the Russian troops have made a partial advance in Bakhmut. However, the offensive operations were ultimately repelled by the Ukrainian defense units. It's also important to note that elite units of the Ukrainian army, such as the Azov and White Wolf units, are present in the region, and their attacks have caused significant losses to the Russian troops. As the situation on the ground remains fluid and both sides continue to make claims and counterclaims, it's important to consider all available evidence before drawing conclusions. The war between Ukraine and Russia has become a phenomenon where drones carry the hopes of freedom to the skies. UAVs, which are in the inventory of the Ukrainian armed forces, are constantly flying over the Ukrainian skies for the surrender practice of the Kiev administration called I Want to Live. A large part of the soldiers in the Russian army, on the other hand, are unaware of their commanders, or they are waiting for hope from the UAVs they send together with the front commanders for the delivery of the Ukrainian forces. This is perhaps the clearest summary of what Russian leader Vladimir Putin has done to his army. The moments of surrender of the Russian troops to the Ukrainian UAVs have started to be experienced intensively, especially in the eastern Donetsk front lines recently. The latest examples of this situation were seen in the city of Bakhmut, the most active front line of the Donetsk region. Let's witness together the most dramatic moments that the Russians have experienced since the beginning of the war, perhaps until now. In recent days, images from the Bakhmut front line, which cannot match the movies, have come. The moment of a flesh and blood soldier surrendering to a plastic and metal robot was captured on camera. The striking footage came as Kiev forces made significant advances in the Bakhmut region this week. According to Ukrainian Ground Forces Commander General Oleksandr Kursky, Yuri Fedorenko, the commander of the drone in Ukraine's 92nd Mechanized Brigade, shared a video of the peace offer on Telegram. The poignant aerial footage released by the Ukrainian military unconfirmed shows the moment when one of Putin's troops was given the option to surrender. The drone combat aircraft team detected a Russian soldier who asked him not to bomb himself. The aircraft crew left him a note with instructions to surrender and follow a drone. The Russian soldier accepted the note left by the drone, even though his friends fired from behind him. Thus began the adventure of the surrender of the Russian soldier. The soldier went out from his trench to open ground and began to follow the drone. The soldier, advancing with the directions from the unmanned aerial vehicle, walked among his friends who lost their lives on the front lines. The march of the Russian soldier was accompanied by Ukrainian infantrymen and scouts. After the march, the soldier reached the Ukrainian positions. Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister Mikhail Fedorov said that the soldier is currently in custody. The most striking detail here is that the Russian soldier surrendered to a drone. Ukraine is calling on Russian soldiers to do just that. According to the reports of the Ukrainian authorities, 3,200 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces in March. More than 4,500 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces in April. According to Vitaly Matviyenko, the number of Russian applications increased by 10% from March to April. In May, this rate increased even more. The main reason for the increase in the number of Russian applicants who wanted to surrender was that Ukraine's counterattack could start at any time. The Russians, who do not ignore this possibility, resort to the compassionate project of Ukraine to save their lives. The offensive of the Ukrainian army, which was expected in May, finally started this week with a big breakthrough. In the past 15 days, the Russian soldiers and army felt much more pressure and experienced a heavy psychological depression. The Ukrainian offensive finally took place with a sudden raid led by the Azov regiment in Bakhmut. While the Great Offensive, led by the Azov Regiment, continues at full speed, the Russians surrender to the Ukrainian army every second or leave their weapons and flee. It is estimated that nearly 1,000 Russian soldiers surrendered to the Azov Regiment, especially in the last 5 days. Surrender rates in May are at an all-time high, averaging at 200 per day. Vitaly Matvienko, head of the Ukraine hotline, announced that more than 19,000 Russian applicants have surrendered to the Ukrainian armed forces through the projects in September began. When we consider all this data, we can clearly understand that there is a serious decline in the Russian army. Breakthroughs in the Russian army are increasing day by day, a blow to the Russian army, which is shaken by the surrendered soldiers, comes from the Kiev forces on the front lines. The Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade is believed to have led the offensive that resulted in Russian troops fleeing Bakhmut. The Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade is the new formation of the Azov Regiment, the tanks of the Ukrainian Azov Regiment, with its new name. The 3rd Taras Brigade also provides support as a result of the joint operations of the tanks and the brigade. The Russian forces are forced to withdraw at the same time. Footage from the front line seems to confirm Ukraine's reports of a successful counterattack around Bakhmut. According to conflict analyst Igor Sushko, the Ukrainian army has recaptured about 7.8 kilometers squared of the city in recent clashes. According to the Ukrainian soldiers on the ground, the 6th and 8th divisions of the Russian army and the 72nd Brigade were defeated. So in which regions and how do the Russians surrender? What measures is Ukraine taking for the surrender of the Russians guaranteeing their lives? The head of the Ukraine hotline, Vitaly Matvienko, noted that the calls came mainly from the Moscow and Leningrad regions, as well as Chelyabinsk, Novgorod and occupied Donetsk, Luhansk and Crimea. Last month, the Ukrainian military released an instructional video explaining how to surrender to a wave to the Russians. The Ukrainian army has released an instructional video for Russian soldiers with a step-by-step guide on how to surrender to one of the drones. The video comes as part of Ukraine's I Want to Live project, a hotline that encourages Russians who do not want to fight in Ukraine to surrender. Soldiers who surrender are instructed to call the I Want to Live hotline to prearrange the time and place of the meeting. After the location of the soldiers are verified, the soldiers must go to the specified place at the exact time specified. Once the soldiers are in place, they should wait for the drone to appear. If the drone has not appeared, soldiers should wait for further instructions. When the soldiers see the UAV in the field of view, they have to make eye contact with it. Soldiers must then raise their arms and signal that they are ready to follow. After that, the drone will move up and down a few meters before moving at walking speed towards the closest representatives of the Ukrainian army. Finally, the drone will liberate the Russian soldiers who want to surrender. Ukraine wants to prove that salvation is so easy and close with the video it has published. In addition, the I Want to Live project initiated by Ukraine reconnected tens of thousands of Russian soldiers to life. Ukrainian authorities reported that a website called I Want to Live created for the Russian soldiers who wanted to surrender had attracted nearly 20 million visitors in the last 8 months. The I Want to Live hotline receives an average of 80 calls a day from people in Russia or the occupied territory of Ukraine who don't want to die for Putin's dreams and are willing to surrender. In addition, Ukraine developed a new strategies to persuade Russian soldiers to surrender and displayed remarkable creativity. Konstantin Melnikov, a war correspondent who is often on the front lines, said that the Ukrainian army designs its own advertising campaigns. Melnikov said Ukrainian troops printed special leaflets, loaded them into shells and fired them in Russian-occupied territory with a Grad rocket launcher. The brochures also contain phone numbers that Russians can call if they want to turn themselves in. A price list showing how much money you can make if you surrender with equipment is also included in the brochures. Soldiers who deliver a tank can receive a $10,000 payment. Analysts say that unlike Russia, the rights of prisoners of war in Ukraine are respected. Ukraine's respect for the rights of prisoners of war is another detail that attracts Russian soldiers. This humanitarian stance of Ukraine paves the way for the surrender of more Russian soldiers. As a result, given the increasing rate of giving up from Vladimir Putin's war and surrendering to the Ukrainians, it's not surprising that drones will capture many more prisoners of war in the weeks and months to come. The real question here is how Vladimir Putin will deal with these surrenders. We will wait and see what the Russian leader's reaction to this humiliating situation will be. The biggest news comes from the north. Here are several reinforced detachments made an unexpected attack on the Russian territory and managed to penetrate Russian defenses by up to 10 kilometers. The group managed to take 4 settlements and establish a 35 kilometers squared bridgehead. The morning started with an artillery preparation that targeted Russian forces on the border along a 35-kilometer line. The head of the Belgorod region reported that Ukrainians struck Russian objects in Kazanka Gora, Podol, Grayvarin, Antonivka, and Zamoysky. The fact that all the settlements are located on the same highway did not raise suspicions, and Russians did not take any preventive actions. After the artillery preparation, a huge column was spotted moving towards the Russian control point, which was heavily assaulted in less than a minute. Judging by the available footage, the assault unit consisted of 2 tanks, 1 armored fighting vehicle, and 9 Humvees. The unit dispersed across multiple facilities located on the Russian control point and started a storming operation. The tanks opened fire at the Russian positions, paved the way for the mobile units, and very quickly broke Russian resistance. Russians reportedly lost several dozen troops before they surrendered. The fighters also reported that in the aftermath of successful storming operations, they captured a Russian armored fighting vehicle, which they promptly drove to the Ukrainian facilities on the other side of the border. But this was only the beginning. For a while, Russian officials did not understand whether the news was fake or not until they were summoned to a meeting. During the meeting, they acknowledged the fact of the penetration, and the governor of the region declared a counter-terrorism regime. Interestingly, all troops participating in the operation were Russian residents. The operation was conducted by the Freedom of Russia Legion and Russian Volunteer Cause. While Russian officials had the meeting, the assault unit was reinforced with additional manpower and immediately assaulted the next 2 settlements on the line Kazanka and Glovo. Russian sources reported that if the control center was assaulted by around 50 troops, then after breaking the first point of resistance, the assault unit was reinforced by up to 500 more troops. It is not surprising that the fighters were shortly spotted from a drone past Kazanka and Glovo. The drone footage showed a unit operating north of Kazanka, and a local resident showed another unit arriving already in Grayvarin. This means that unprepared Russian forces retreated and lost control over 3 settlements. The volunteer detachment started facing resistance after already penetrating Russian positions by around 8 kilometers. Several hours later, Russians were seen sending empty buses for the evacuation of people from the nearby settlements. Local residents also noticed engagements of multiple transport and assault helicopters such as Mi-8, Mi-28, and Kar-52. The footage shows how one helicopter automatically discharged false hit targets. This got Russians worried because it implied that the helicopter radar picked up a signal from a Ukrainian air defense. This caused further delays in the reaction, as the border was less than 25 kilometers away and an air defense missile could potentially shoot down a Russian helicopter. Later, it was reported that one helicopter, Mi-8, fell down near Prokhorovka. Interestingly, this one was out of reach of Ukrainian air defense, so it was highly likely a malfunction. When Russian forces finally arrived in Grayvarin, the volunteer detachments had almost established full control over the settlement. Local residents that chose to evacuate noticed that Russians were sending reinforcements. The fighters reported active use of artillery by both sides. Some sources mentioned that there was an explosion on the Russian base with tactical nuclear warheads that is only 4 kilometers away from the contact line. However, all nuclear warheads have been relocated from here a long time ago. Tough fights broke out as local residents reported hearing rounds of gunfire continuously. The attack was also accompanied by drone strikes. The latest strikes reportedly hit the buildings of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and also the Department of the Russian Secret Services. The Russian state media reported that Russian forces made a trap and lured Ukrainians deep into the Russian territory for an easier elimination of the assault detachments. Such an evaluation received a countrywide critique. The latest reports suggest that Russian forces managed to return control over Gravarin. However, it seems like the operation still continues.